The rain was relentless, pounding the streets of Seattle like it had a personal vendetta against the city. Ezra Cole, soaked to the bone, ducked under the awning of a dimly lit coffee shop, his sneakers squelching with every step. He wasn't supposed to be here, not in this part of town. Not chasing a fleeting moment that might have meant nothing. 3 months ago, Ezra's life had been predictable. A barista by day, an aspiring graphic novelist by night, sketching dreams that felt just out of reach. Then came Julian Harper, all sharp cheekbones and effortless charm, waltzing into Ezra's coffee shop like he owned the place. Their first meeting wasn't love at first sight, it was a spilled latte, a quick apology, and a smirk that lingered too long. Julian was a whirlwind, a freelance photographer with a knack for turning mundane moments into art. Their connection was instant, electric, but Ezra had been burned before. He swore it was just casual fling, nothing more. Yet here he was, heart racing, standing outside a bar where Julian had asked to meet after weeks of radio silence. The bar's neon sign flickered, casting a red glow over Ezra's reflection in the window. He pushed the door open, the hum of conversation and clinking glasses swallowing him whole. Julian was there, leaning against the bar, his dark green jacket slightly rumpled, a glass of whiskey in hand. His eyes found Ezra's, and for a moment, the world stilled. "You came," Julian said, his voice low, almost surprised. Ezra shrugged, trying to play it cool, but his pulse betrayed him. Didn't have anything better to do. They talked for hours, the conversation weaving between playful banter and something deeper, unguarded. Julian admitted he'd been traveling for work, chasing a story across the Pacific Northwest. But his texts had grown sparse, leaving Ezra to wonder if he'd misread everything. "I'm not good at this," Julian confessed, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. "Keeping people close. But I couldn't stop thinking about you." Ezra's breath caught. He wanted to believe it, but doubt gnawed at him. Casual. That's all this was supposed to be. Days turned into weeks, and their routine settled into something dangerously comfortable. Late-night drives along the coast, Julian's camera capturing Ezra's silhouette against the Puget Sound. Quiet mornings in Ezra's cramped apartment, sharing coffee and stolen kisses. But Julian was elusive, always holding a piece of himself back. Ezra sensed the way Julian's smile faltered when the word relationship came up, the way he'd changed the subject when Ezra asked about his family. "They're complicated," Julian would say, leaving it at that. Ezra didn't push. He couldn't afford to care too much. Yet care he did. It crept up on him, uninvited, like ivy curling around a fence. He noticed it in the way his chest tightened when Julian laughed, or how he memorized the freckles across Julian's nose. Ezra tried to keep his walls up, but Julian had a way of slipping through the cracks. Still, every time Ezra thought they were getting closer, Julian would pull back a canceled plan, a vague excuse. It stung. But Ezra told himself it was fine. Casual was safe. Casual didn't break your heart. Then came the invitation. It was a Tuesday night, and they were sprawled on Ezra's couch, half watching a sci-fi movie. Julian's head rested on Ezra's shoulder, his fingers lazily tracing circles on Ezra's wrist. "My family's having a reunion this weekend," Julian said, almost too casually. "In Tacoma. You should come." Ezra froze, his heart doing a somersault. "Your family?" he asked, voice cautious. Julian nodded. his eyes fixed on the TV. Yeah, it's no big deal. Just food, music, chaos. You'd like it. Ezra hesitated. Meeting family wasn't casual. It was a line, a leap, a risk. But Julian's tone was light, dismissive, like it was just another hangout. Against his better judgment, Ezra said yes. The drive to Tacoma was a blur of nerves and anticipation. Julian was quieter than usual, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. Ezra tried to fill the silence with small talk, but his mind raced. What was he walking into? Julian's family was a mystery never mentioned beyond vague references to a big, loud clan. Ezra pictured a sprawling, judgmental brood, sizing him up, wondering why Julian had dragged some random barista to their reunion. He tugged at the sleeves of his flannel, suddenly self-conscious. "You okay?" Julian asked, glancing over. Ezra forced a smile. "Yeah, just not sure what I'm doing here." Julian's hand found his, squeezing briefly. "You're with me. That's enough." The Harper family home was a sprawling craftsman-style house, nestled in a quiet Tacoma suburb. String lights crisscrossed the backyard, where tables groaned under platters of barbecue, potato salad, and pies. Laughter and music filled the air, mingling with the scent of charcoal and summer grass. Ezra hung back as Julian was swept into a whirlwind of hugs and backslaps from aunts, uncles, and cousins. He felt like an outsider, clutching a soda can, watching Julian move through the crowd with ease. This was Julian's world, and Ezra was just a guest. Then it happened. Julian's mother, a petite woman with a warm smile and sharp eyes, called everyone to gather for a toast. Julian wove through the crowd, grabbed Ezra's hand, and pulled him to the center of the circle. Ezra's stomach dropped. "Everyone," Julian said, his voice steady but laced with something Ezra couldn't place. "This is Ezra, my boyfriend." The word hit like a thunderclap. Ezra's face burned, his mind reeling. Boyfriend? Since when? The crowd erupted in cheers, glasses raised, but Ezra couldn't hear them over the pounding in his ears. Julian's hand tightened around his, grounding him, but the world felt like it was spinning out of control. Ezra stood frozen, Julian's hand still clasped around his, the word boyfriend echoing in his head like a siren. The Harper family's cheers faded into a dull roar, their smiling faces blurring into a kaleidoscope of curiosity and warmth. Ezra forced a smile, his heart hammering so loud he was sure everyone could hear it. Julian leaned in, his breath warm against Ezra's ear. "Just go with it," he whispered, his voice carrying a hint of a plea. Ezra nodded, but his mind was a storm of questions. Why now? Why here? And why hadn't Julian warned him? The toast ended, and the crowd dispersed, relatives pulling Julian into conversations while Ezra drifted to the edge of the backyard. He sipped his soda, the fizz doing little to calm the chaos inside him. Julian's mother, Clara, approached, her eyes crinkling with kindness. "Ezra, right?" she said, her voice like honey. "Julian's told us so much about you." Ezra blinked, caught off guard. "He has?" Clara laughed, patting his arm. "Oh, honey, he hasn't shut up about you. The way you draw. Your coffee shop storyish smitten." Ezra's chest tightened. Smitten. That wasn't casual. That wasn't a fling. As Clara wandered off to greet more guests, Ezra scanned the crowd for Julian. He was laughing with a cousin, his ease a stark contrast to Ezra's turmoil. When their eyes met, Julian's smile faltered, like he could sense Ezra's unease. He excused himself and crossed the lawn, his steps purposeful. "You okay?" Julian asked, his voice low. Ezra opened his mouth, then closed it, unsure where to start. "Boyfriend," he finally said, the word sharp. Julian rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit Ezra had come to recognize. "Yeah, I meant it." Ezra's breath hitched. "You meant it, Julian. We've never even talked about this. You can't just—" He stopped, glancing around at the relatives nearby. "Can we talk somewhere else?" They slipped away to a quiet corner of the backyard, near a row of blooming hydrangeas. The music and laughter felt distant now, the air heavy with unspoken truths. "I'm sorry I sprang that on you," Julian said, his eyes searching Ezra's. "I didn't plan it. It just came out." Ezra crossed his arms, trying to anchor himself. "You don't get to just decide I'm your boyfriend in front of your whole family, Julian. We're casual. That's what we agreed on." Julian flinched, but his gaze didn't waver. "Is that what you want? To keep it casual?" The question hung between them, raw and exposed. Ezra wanted to say yes, to protect himself. But the truth was messier. He cared about Julian too much, and that terrified him. Before Ezra could answer, a voice interrupted. "Julian." "Ezra." It was Julian's older brother, Marcus, a broad-shouldered man with a booming laugh. "You two hiding out here? Come on. We're starting the games." Julian hesitated, then grabbed Ezra's hand. "We're coming," he called, his eyes still locked on Ezra's, as if daring him to pull away. Ezra didn't. Not yet. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of cornhole, charades, and family stories that painted a vivid picture of the Harpers. They were loud, loving, and fiercely loyal, but Ezra couldn't shake the feeling that he was an imposter. Julian stayed close, his touches lingering, a hand on Ezra's back, a brush of their shoulders. Each one sent a jolt through Ezra, a reminder of the line they'd crossed. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the backyard in a golden glow, Ezra's emotions were a tangled mess of hope and fear. Dinner was a communal affair. Long tables packed with relatives passing plates and stories. Ezra sat beside Julian, their knees brushing under the table. Clara stood to make another toast, her eyes twinkling as she looked at them. "To family," she said, raising her glass. "And to new beginnings, like Julian and Ezra's." The table erupted in cheers again, and Ezra's face flushed. Julian's hand found his under the table, squeezing gently. "I meant it," Julian whispered again, his voice barely audible over the noise. Ezra's heart ached with the weight of it. He wanted to believe Julian meant it. "Ezra, I love you." But the words didn't erase the sting of being blindsided. He needed answers. But the warmth of Julian's family, the sincerity in Julian's eyes, it was all too much. Too fast. As the night wound down, Ezra found himself alone on the porch, staring at the stars. Julian joined him, his presence both comforting and overwhelming. "I've never done this before," Julian admitted, his voice soft. "Brought someone home. Told my family I'm, you know." Ezra's breath caught. Julian was coming out to his family. and he'd chosen Ezra to stand beside him for it. The weight of that trust hit hard. But so did the fear. What if this was just another impulsive move? Another moment Julian would pull back from. "Why me?" Ezra asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Julian's eyes softened. "Because you're the first person who's ever felt like home." Ezra's heart stuttered at Julian's words. The night air thick with the scent of pine and the distant hum of the party. Home. The word felt too big, too fragile, like a glass ornament teetering on the edge of a shelf. He wanted to lean into it, to let himself believe in the possibility of something real. But doubt clung to him like damp clothes after a rainstorm. Julian had a history of running when things got serious. Ezra had seen it, felt it. What if this was just another fleeting moment? A spark that would fizzle out by morning. They sat on the porch steps, the glow of string lights casting soft shadows across Julian's face. He looked vulnerable, his usual confidence replaced by something raw, unguarded. "I've never told them," Julian said, his voice low, almost lost in the night. "My family. About me. About being bi." Ezra's breath caught, the pieces clicking into place. The family reunion. The sudden declaration, it wasn't just about them. It was Julian stepping into a truth he'd kept hidden for years. "I didn't know how they'd react," Julian continued, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his jacket. "But when I saw you here, with them, felt right. Like I could finally be honest." Ezra's chest ached with a mix of pride and panic. He wanted to be the person Julian could lean on. But the weight of being someone's first, the first to be brought home, the first to be called boyfriend, was overwhelming. "You could have warned me," Ezra said, his voice soft but firm. "I would have been ready. I would have, I don't know, stood taller or something." Julian's laugh was quiet, tinged with relief. "You're already tall enough," he teased. But his eyes were serious. "I'm sorry." Panicked. "I spent so long hiding. And tonight, I wanted them to know you. To know us." The vulnerability in Julian's voice cracked something open in Ezra. He'd spent months guarding his heart, keeping things casual to avoid the pain of being left again. But Julian wasn't leaving, not tonight. At least, he was here, bearing his soul under a Tacoma sky, asking Ezra to be part of something bigger. Ezra reached for Julian's hand, their fingers intertwining. "I'm proud of you," he said, the words heavy with truth. "But I'm scared. Jules. This is a lot." Julian nodded, his thumb brushing over Ezra's knuckles. "I know. I'm scared too." The moment was interrupted by Marcus, who bounded onto the porch with a grin. "You two lovebirds done brooding. We're cutting the cake." Julian squeezed Ezra's hand, a silent promise, and they rejoined the party. The Harpers treated Ezra like one of their own, pulling him into stories and inside jokes. Clara handed him a slice of chocolate cake, her smile warm. "You're good for him," she whispered, and Ezra's throat tightened. He wanted to be good for Julian, but the fear lingered. What if he wasn't enough? As the night wore on, Julian's family began to share stories of their own struggles, their triumphs, their love for each other. Marcus talked about his divorce, his voice steady but heavy, and how the family had rallied around him. Julian's cousin, Lena, spoke of her fight to be accepted as a trans woman, her eyes fierce with pride. Each story wove a tapestry of resilience, and Ezra felt a quiet shift inside him. This wasn't just a family. It was a sanctuary, and Julian had invited him in. When the party began to wind down, Julian pulled Ezra aside, leading him to a quiet spot by the garage. "I need you to know something," Julian said, his voice steady now, like he'd found his footing. "I've spent my life running from my family, from myself. But I don't want to run from you." Ezra's heart pounded, the words sinking deep. "I'm not good at staying still," Julian admitted. "But I want to try. For you." Ezra's eyes stung, and he looked away, focusing on the distant stars. "I want that too," he said finally. "But I need you to mean it. No half measures." Julian's response was a kiss, soft, tentative, then deepening with a promise. It wasn't a Fling's kiss. It was something heavier, something real. When they pulled back, Julian's forehead rested against Ezra's. "No half measures," he echoed. They stood there, wrapped in each other, until Clara called them back for one last family photo. As the camera flashed, Ezra felt the weight of Julian's arm around his shoulders, grounding him in a moment he'd never expected to be part of. The drive back to Seattle was quiet, the hum of the car a backdrop to their thoughts. Ezra stared out the window, the city lights blurring past. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Julian's hand found his, their fingers lacing together. "We figure it out," Julian said. "Together." It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was enough for now. Ezra leaned his head against the window, the word boyfriend still ringing in his ears. A fragile hope taking root. Back in Seattle, the city felt different, like it had shifted in the hours they'd been gone. Ezra's apartment was the same cluttered sketchbooks, half-empty coffee mugs, but the air carried a new weight. Julian stayed the night, his camera bag tossed in the corner, his presence filling the space with something Ezra couldn't name. They didn't talk much, just curled up on the couch, the TV flickering with some forgotten show. Julian's head rested on Ezra's chest, his breathing steady, and Ezra's fingers traced absent patterns through his hair. It was intimate, vulnerable, and terrifyingly real. The next morning, over coffee, Julian broke the silence. "I want to do this right," he said, his eyes fixed on the mug in his hands. "No more running. No more vague texts. I want to be your boyfriend, Ezra. For real." Ezra's heart leapt, but old wounds whispered caution. He'd been here before, promises made, then broken. But Julian's eyes were steady, his voice unwavering. "I'm not saying it'll be easy," Julian added. "I've got baggage, but I want to unpack it with you." Ezra swallowed hard, the weight of the weekend crashing over him. Julian's family, their acceptance, the way they'd folded Ezra into their world, it had cracked open something in him. He wanted to believe in this, in them. "Okay," Ezra said finally, his voice soft but sure. "Let's do it. Boyfriends." The word felt foreign, but right, like a new sketch coming to life on a blank page. Julian's smile was blinding, and he leaned across the table to kiss Ezra, slow and deliberate, sealing the promise. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a beginning, messy and uncertain. But the weeks that followed were a dance of learning each other. Julian stayed true to his word, showing up consistent, lino-canceled plans. No vague excuses. They spent evenings at Ezra's coffee shop, Julian snapping photos of the regulars while Ezra sketched in the corner. They took weekend trips to the coast, Julian's camera capturing Ezra's laughter against the waves. There were fights. 2 moments when Ezra's fear of being left clashed with Julian's fear of being truly seen. But they talked through it. Raw and honest. Building something stronger with each conversation. One night, Julian invited Ezra to another family dinner. This time smaller. Just Clara, Marcus, and Lena. It was less overwhelming, but no less meaningful. Clara hugged Ezra tightly, whispering, "You're one of us now." Lena shared stories of her own journey, her resilience a quiet inspiration. Marcus teased Julian mercilessly, but his warmth toward Ezra was genuine. The Harpers weren't perfect, but they were real, and they saw Ezra as part of Julian's life, not a fling, but a future. Months later, Ezra stood in his apartment, staring at a sketch he'd drawn of Julian, his sharp cheekbones, his quiet smile, the freckles Ezra now knew by heart. The page was filled with moments. Julian at the reunion, his hand in Ezra's. Julian laughing on the beach. Julian asleep on the couch, his guard down. It was a story Ezra hadn't meant to write, but one he couldn't stop telling. Julian walked in, peering over Ezra's shoulder. "That's me?" he asked, his voice soft with wonder. Ezra nodded, his throat tight. "That's us." They weren't a fling anymore. They were a commitment, a choice made every day to show up, to stay, to love. Julian's family had given Ezra a glimpse of what that could mean, a community that embraced them, flaws and all. And as Ezra leaned into Julian's arms, the city humming outside, he realized something profound. Love wasn't just the spark of a moment. It was the courage to stand in front of a crowd, to claim someone as yours, and to keep choosing them, even when it scared you. For Ezra and Julian, that choice was their greatest victory. A story written not in fleeting glances, but in the quiet, steady beat of 2 hearts finding home.